Welcome to the final period of our subject entrepreneurship. So we will continue with the last part of developing a business plan. So of course, the business plan will never be complete if the operations and financial plan are not included. So these two play a very important role in ensuring that the business is operationally feasible and financially viable. So even if the marketing plan looks very promising, the business will not be successful without a detailed operations and financial plan. So these two will tell if the big idea generated through the product development process is realistic. Okay, so for this module 6, it will introduce you to the fundamentals of product development and the operational requirements of a business, which is represented by the 4 M's. We have the manpower, the method, the machine, and materials. So you should learn the methods before commercializing a product or service. You will understand how to identify and comply with the business requirements before running an enterprise. You will also know the importance of crafting a business model as a blueprint of the business operations. And of course, you will be taught how to account actual and future performance of a business enterprise through the preparation and analysis of the different financial statements. Okay, so I will introduce the different financial statements later on. Alright, so moving on with the product development, operations, and financial plan. Okay, so of course, before you're going to commercialize a new product or service, it is very important that you have to refine the product or service and validate its market acceptability first. So this product does not have to be a totally new product. It can be a new product line from an existing business of the entrepreneur, or maybe a product line extension, or an enhancement or innovation, or a repositioning of an existing product. Okay, so we have the fundamentals of product development. What is this product development? So the product development, this is a process. It is the process of developing, testing, and commercializing a product or service with the ultimate objective of course, solving the problem of the primary target market, right? So it is composed of 4 sequential methods. We have the first one, developing a product or service description. We also have to create the prototype, testing the prototype, and the validating the market. So we will be discussing this one by one. Alright, so moving on with the first one, we have the product or service description. So this simply describes how a product or how a service works and how it benefits the customers. Okay, so a clear product or service description is very important because this will serve as the blueprint of all your business operations. Therefore, the entrepreneur has to take note of the following regarding the product or service description. Okay, so take note of this one if you are going to create your description for your product or for your service. First one, it should directly address the primary target market in a personal manner using everyday language. Kung ano yung naiintindihan ng customer natin, our target market. So the entrepreneur should also put himself or herself in the customer's shoes where the product's description will be addressed to. Alright? The second one, it should highlight the features that will cater to the customer needs or address the customer's problem. Okay? So that's it. It should cater to the customer's needs and the problems of the customers. And of course, realistic superlatives should be used. Okay? Again, realistic superlatives should be used for the product description. Motherhood statements such as world-class service or product excellence may not actually matter to the customers at all. Okay, so just be simple and just be direct to the point if you're going to create your product or your service description. All right, moving on. After defining the product or service, you may now proceed with one of the most exciting but of course very challenging parts of product or service development, which is the creation of a prototype. What is this prototype? A prototype is a preliminary model or a sample of a new product or sample of the service that is created to test a product or a service process. So this is an exciting process for the entrepreneur because he or she will be able to see that his ideas or her ideas will soon become a tangible reality. Okay, so the entrepreneur's creativity and ingenuity will be used in creating the prototype. Okay, so it is a model, a sample of the product. Okay, that's prototype. So according to most of the some of the entrepreneurs, creating a prototype lessens the implementation and commercialization risk, and it also provides the entrepreneur a bunch of advantages. What are these advantages? Let's see. The first one, it says here, it enables the entrepreneur to engage in trial and error. Okay? It also provides room for improvement, and it refines the functionality of the product design or service process. So it is very expensive and risk intensive to commercialize a product without creating a prototype. So it's very important that you have to create a prototype before you will commercialize it. Alright? Another advantage says here, it provides the entrepreneur a window to test the performance and specifications of the various materials and service processes. So every detail of the product or services should be scrutinized and all flaws be addressed immediately, right away before the commercialization. Okay, so you see the advantage of creating a prototype first before commercializing it? Diba? It saves time. Okay? Another, a prototype helps the entrepreneur effectively describe the product or service to the product team. Again, it helps the entrepreneur effectively describe the product or service to the product team. Because of course, members of the product team include the marketing, operations, engineers, we also have the suppliers, business partners, and so on. So by creating a prototype, it provides the information needed to the product team in creating the right product or service as planned. Kasi 'di ba, you're going to test it, right? You will see it will provide room for improvements. So it will save time for all the team members, the product team members. Okay? And the last one, creating a prototype also elicits respect from stakeholders and customers. At the same time, a prototype gives credibility to the entrepreneur. Some entrepreneurs only present vague and big ideas but no details as to its feasibility and implementation. So by creating a prototype, this will be the stage wherein you as an entrepreneur can experiment, you can be able to develop and make some improvement or adjustments in your potential product or service. Alright, so the objective of the entrepreneur at this stage is to verify, to know if the product or service concept will work at the simplest, fastest, and of course, cheapest way. So one technique for creating the best prototype is by studying the competitor's product or service. That is one. So the entrepreneur will try to scrutinize the parts and functions, as well as the design and other attributes of that product, in hopes, of course, that he or she will be able to address some problems in the competitors' products and come up with the most efficient and effective prototype. Right? So it's important also that you try to try to observe your competitors' products, right? Benchmarking. You try to benchmark. And of course, as of the services naman, the entrepreneur may try availing the competitors' services and will take note of their operations, such as how they're going to conduct their service delivery, how about their location, try to observe the facilities and the ambience. So it's just simply trying their services and then observe. Okay? And then of course, you will have to take note of the pros and cons of the service to create the prototype. Right? So simulate the service by trying it with maybe trying it with your friends or relatives and then get their feedback. Okay? Some entrepreneurs also create a video presentation or a miniature prototype, so they will be able to explain the details if the product is to be viewed by a panel of specialists, right? So it's also important that you will come up with your own video presentation. Okay? So the scope should be related to entrepreneur's budget. Take note of that. Okay? It should be within the budget. Okay? So after creating the prototype, then you should be ready to test it. Alright, so moving on. Always remember that all the efforts exerted in the creation of a prototype will be put to waste if the prototype will not be tested. So it is very important that there will be a testing of the product prototype. So testing the product prototype is a very vital process before an actual product or service is launched to the market. So before you will bring out your product to the market, make sure that you test first. Okay? Because this will uncover the final loopholes that will be that needs to be fixed before commercialization. This will also gives the entrepreneur a leeway to examine and scrutinize the prototype and provide feedback as to what can be improved before the launching of your product or service. Okay, so these improvements and changes must be completed first before moving forward to the next step. So for the prototype that has already been refined, testing it for the last time after the changes have been made will validate its readiness for commercialization. Okay, so let's see the following testing methods. These are applied by most of the entrepreneurs. Okay, we have the first one, focus group discussion. So for this testing method, the participants will provide relevant insights about the new product or service. Also, the objective of this one, focus group discussion, is to identify errors, identify deficiencies or kakulangan sa product or service, and some issues that may impede the success of your product. Okay, so participants also need to provide suggestions and practical solutions on how to improve these deficiencies. So that's very important to have. It's very important to have a focus group discussion, okay, in order to, of course, listen to the different feedbacks of the members of the group. Another, legality and ethical test. So prior to launching, the entrepreneur must ensure that the product or service complies with all the relevant laws and regulations and has a necessary license or permit to operate a particular business. So, for example, the food products must be cleared first by the BFAD or the Bureau of Food and Drugs before they are offered to the public. That is very important. Okay, so the entrepreneur must also make sure that the manufacturing or the production of the goods or offering of the service does do not generate ethical issues such as maybe being threats to health, threats to the safety, and even threats to the environment. All right. Another is safety test. So the entrepreneur must ensure that the product the product is safe to use. So safe to be consumed as well if this is a food and beverage product. Safe to be applied if these are cosmetic products. So the products should not in any way harm the customer or put the customer in any peculiar situations. When it comes to services, the entrepreneur must ensure that the process to be performed by the service provider must not be detrimental to the safety and health of the customer. Okay? We also have the product costing test, another testing that you have to perform, wherein the entrepreneur examine every stage of the manufacturing process or every process of the service blueprint. This is to evaluate and finalize the cost involved. So this is the time wherein the entrepreneur can match the expected cost versus his or her budget. Okay, so modification in the manufacturing process or service blueprint can still be made at this point. Why it is important to do the modification in case it's needed? Of course, this is to align with the cost objective of the entrepreneur. Okay? And we also have the component test. So each component of the product or the service must be tested independently. Isa-isa yan. This is to identify component failures for either your goods or services. Okay? Identify the failures. That's very important because any failure identified must be redesigned and tested again and again until it becomes fully operational and functional. Okay? And the last one, we have the competitor's product or what we call the service test. So in this test, it is the entrepreneur must test a similar line of products. So you have to test a similar line of product or the competitor's product or service itself. This is to compare. Okay? And of course, by comparing, you will be able to get the best practices to be applied to the new product or service. Okay? So you will be observing and try to compare your product with your competitor's product or service that they are offering. Alright? So, testing the product prototype is very important. This is mandatory. This is to ensure that the product or your service will not fail the customer's expectations, of course, and to make sure that it will deliver its purpose. Okay? So this will also elicit customer satisfaction and eventually customer loyalty and retention. Okay? So this is the time to prove that the concept formulated by you will work and it is feasible in the real life. So all the mistakes accounted for and the improvements to be fixed should be performed first prior to the commercialization of your product or your service. Okay, so that is why testing the product prototype is a must. Moving on, validation of market acceptability. So what is this validation of market acceptability? It is actually a process. So this is a process of finding out if the intended primary target market will be buying your product or availing your service. So market acceptability is a critical factor that you as an entrepreneur must validate before launching your product or service, because this can actually strongly suggest if the business will be successful or not. So it either validates or disconfirms the perception of the entrepreneur about the suitability of the chosen primary target market. So in this process also, it will test whether the value proposition and the unique selling proposition are appropriate, or maybe there is a need to improve or change on them. So in this process also, uh, it is the time wherein you have to deeply understand the value that the product or service brings to the customer and their prospective purchase behavior, because it helps the entrepreneur to build a more relevant and meaningful product or service. So this process is the last step before the product or service can be introduced to the market. Okay, so let's just see some following, some objective questions that are more likely to be answered in the whole process if you will do this market acceptability validation. So we have two questions in here. Will the primary target market like the product or service? Gugustuhin kaya nila yung ilalabas mo na product? Another question is, will the primary target market buy the product or service when it is already in the market? If you're going to launch it in the market, mag-a-avail ba sila sa product mo? Okay, so these questions can easily be answered if the entrepreneur will perform the following activities. So what are these activities? We have the first one: use the most strategic marketing research tool. Ayan, so it's important that you do a marketing research first by using the following tool. It can be the FGD, what we discussed a while ago, which is the focus group discussion, or maybe in a form of a survey, an observation, an interview, maybe an online survey, email, or a combination of these research tools wherein you as an entrepreneur can get the most relevant answers in the cheapest way possible. Another, prepare relevant open-ended questions that answer the objective. Okay, so do not go around the bush and be straight to the point. You have to keep the questions to a minimum because your target market might get bored and not finish the whole questionnaire. Another, find market experts who also target the same market, but are not, of course, directly competing with the entrepreneur. So, for example, a market expert sells cars to a specific market segment, and it so happens that an entrepreneur sells real estate. Okay, so that entrepreneur who is selling the real estate can leverage on the knowledge of the market expert regarding the market segment because they almost have the same demographic data requirements. So the entrepreneur can use this data to improve the product or service. Okay, and the last one is to collate all the data. And of course, after collating those data, you have to analyze them and prepare a summative report that will answer the questions that were mentioned earlier. What were the questions again? Will the primary target market like the product or service? And will the primary target market buy the product or service when it is already in the market? Okay. Again, before commercializing a new product or service, it is very important for you as an entrepreneur to focus first on refining your product or service and validate its market acceptability by, of course, observing the 4 sequential steps of the product development, which includes developing a product or service description, creating the product prototype, testing the prototype, and validating the market. Self-check number 1. Based on what you have observed, Do you think the Philippine entrepreneurs test their products or services first before launching them to the public? Why? Self-check number 2. Assume that you have available capital that can finance any original product or service you have in mind. Using your original product or service, apply what you have learned in the product development. Number 1, prepare a product or service description. Number 2, what will be your game plan for your product or service prototype? How will you test it? Number 3, how will you execute your product acceptability validation?